Hey there, I'm here with Jonathan Shannon from the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations. They're the people who fly into hurricanes and other major weather systems to do research in an effort to make better forecasts for the track of such systems and the impacts of them. They fly in a big P-3 Orion 4-propeller. Really, these are submarine hunters for the Navy. They've been converted over to become hurricane hunters because they're really stout airplanes and they can take a beating. Also, the high-altitude Gulfstream 4 jet. I've flown in both of those aircraft, and both times they've been very interesting rides because one of them was inside of Hurricane Sandy back in 2012. It was like being buffeted around in a school bus on a dirt road at 80 miles an hour. It was turbulence I didn't know existed, so it was quite an experience. And so the research and the effort that goes into this research is quite venerable for what these folks do every day for us. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the 2022 hurricane season and also some of the neat new devices and toys, if you will, that are going to be used to gather critical weather data to make even better forecasts than we've ever seen before. So with that, Jonathan, I wanted to say good day to you, sir, and also just for folks that aren't really familiar maybe with the whole concept of flying into a hurricane. Why would you ever fly into a hurricane? What do we learn flying into a hurricane that a satellite can't figure out from safely above?
Well, thanks for having me, Brooks, and that is a question we get often. So Miss Piggy behind me is one of our P3s that fly into the hurricane itself. So what we have is a flying laboratory. Basically, we take the weather station to the weather. So over my shoulder here, over here is the aft end of the aircraft is our tail Doppler radar. So that gives us vertical profiling of what's going on inside the system. And then there's a black little sort of M&M penny right there over my shoulder. That is a horizontal radar. So inside we can take sort of a scan from within the storm that you just can't get via satellite. And we're also collecting in situ or on location data of temperature, pressure, humidity, wind speed, and wind direction using these instruments called dropsondes. I've got a couple here, some of our older models and some of our newer models we'll talk about in a second. But this data is very critical to understand how the storms form, how they intensify, and how they progress. And understanding how that pressure changes over time and finding that center is very important to figure out where the storm's going to be going and how strong it's going to be once it gets there.
So we've got all of the tools. We've got the radar, the dropsondes. Are there any data gaps? Any parts of the storm you've hoped to sample, but maybe due to the technology not really being there, or maybe the safety issues of flying where you need to fly? Are there any critical gaps in the data gathering that you hope to fill with some of the new technology being employed?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brooks. So when we're flying into the storms, we're flying in at about 8,000 to 10,000 feet. So we're getting sort of a higher level, but what we're really concerned about is where we live, right? Where the rubber meets the road, as it were, in that interface or that boundary layer between the hurricane, the storm itself, and the ground or the ocean. That's just too unsafe for us to fly in with our aircraft. So the dropsondes, as they fall through the air, they get a profile, and then as they splash down in the ocean, they stop transmitting. But they give us sort of a snapshot in time of what's going on in that lower level, say 1,500 feet and below. One of the technologies we're working on now is an uncrewed aircraft system or a drone that we're able to launch from our aircraft and have it loiter in that area. So instead of a picture or a snapshot, it's getting us more of a movie of what's going on inside the storm. And so that sort of continuous stream of data is going to be very useful in understanding the intensity question. And another piece that we've tested along with that uncrewed aircraft system are these air-launched autonomous micro-observers, or Alamo floats, that we're able to drop out, and they can persist for weeks and transmit data, every 1 to 2 hours on what's going on in the ocean itself, because any hurricane depends on the fuel from the ocean. So the temperature of the ocean surface, the salinity, all the way down to 300 meters, that is measuring, and it's giving that information in real time, and we can get it ahead of the storm if we drop it in front of approaching storms as well as within storms with our aircraft. And that's really helpful in understanding that intensity question. How does the changing condition of the ocean affect the intensity of that storm?
When I flew into Hurricane Sandy back in 2012, they dropped, I think, about 40 dropsondes out of the P3. We were flying on Gonzo. There's Miss Piggy and there's Gonzo, two of those P3 Orion aircraft. It was a pretty risky thing to see them punch through this eye wall, very turbulent. And when they dropped the dropsondes in, they got the data, those things fall into the ocean, and then they're gone forever. So you'd mentioned that you're using almost like a drone technology. You're gonna shoot these miniature airplanes out the bottom of the plane, essentially, and it's gonna fly around for a while in those areas that are simply too low to fly yourself manually, like in a manned aircraft, right? Because if you're too low, that can be dangerous if you get a downdraft.
That's right. So we are going to be using these uncrewed systems, launch them from the aircraft in sort of the same tubes that we can launch these Alamo floats or these airborne expendable bathythermographs or thermometers for the ocean. But we're going to launch these uncrewed aircraft or drones so that they can fly along inside the hurricane eye wall, possibly even go into the eye wall. We're testing those models now. We've done an operational a mass model experiment test where we made sure that it was safe for that type of system to go out of our aircraft and not come back up and possibly hit the aircraft. But we're looking forward to trying to operationally test these drones this season coming up.
That's really exciting. It sounds like something out of a James Bond movie, right? Where you have these like switchblades that launch and then they go and fly into the worst of the storm where it's just too dangerous for people to venture. As far as what the Alamo system is measuring, these sort of autonomous miniature boats that are floating around or sampling some of the ocean, and you had mentioned the salt, the salinity. How does something like salinity affect the strength of a tropical system?
Well, that's a good question. So, you have different water layers inside an ocean, and some can be hotter or more dense than others. And so the salinity can tell you when your different water masses are moving. If you've got like bottom water upwelling that will bring cooler water up into the area and maybe weaken the storm, or else if it's going to be really hot, really salty water that's just going to be able to hold a lot of heat. So it's an interesting mix to help you figure out what type of water mass you're dealing with based on where
really
they sit on each other in the ocean.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I remember with a lot of the Gulf hurricanes, especially when they're slow movers and they're sitting in the Gulf of Mexico, they'll create upwelling, and that's when the colder ocean waters from the bottom come up to the top, and it created a cooler layer at the top, and that essentially pulled away a lot of its strength, leading to a weakening before making landfall. I believe Katrina was one of those, where it was a Cat 5, and then it became a Cat 3 by the time it actually made landfall.
That's correct. So what we want to track is, as it's intensifying, does it have the opportunity to pull up that cooler, deeper water, which is less saline, or is it still feeding off the hotter upper water that potentially is more saline? So salinity is like a fingerprint on the different types of water masses we're using. Temperature, that helps us define what portion of the water we're dealing with and what properties it has and how it might help strengthen the hurricane.
Is the 2022 hurricane season going to be one where you can officially declare that you're using one of these new technologies a lot more regularly than in previous seasons when maybe they were being tested?
Well, we're still in the operational testing phase. We hope to be able to use them more and more frequently. We are being the uncrewed systems are part of a grant program NOAA has for small businesses to try and design things to address research needs we have. And so this is in the operational testing phase of that. If they perform well, then they might be able to get further funding to become commercially available. Other things we're working on are improving our dropsondes from like a regular size dropsondes here. We're developing what we call these mini sondes here. So they're a little bit smaller, as you can see, from about a Pringles size can to maybe a paper towel roll about size. And these are being developed so that we can develop automatic launchers, especially in our new aircraft that we're working to come online, our G550, which would be moving even faster than Gonzo is, so that we can sample more of the upper atmosphere around the storms with an automated launcher.
So is the G550 like a G6? Sorry, I had to go there. Bad joke. Great song. Just kidding.
Well,
we keep it light.
It will be luxurious for science, basically. So we'll have the best computer racks, the best sensors that we can get. No leather, Corinthian leather seats or anything like that. But it will definitely be great for what we need it for.
When I boarded the G4, I'd gone on a training mission from MacDill Air Force Base up to Jacksonville Navy Air Station just to do a couple of touch and goes, and we came back. But I had an opportunity to tour the plane and fly in it, and I was expecting your typical business jet, but I was struck by just the computer racks and the thought of how tight everything was and how all the scientific equipment was squeezed into a small space, how carefully and how efficient it was all laid out, but how utterly unluxurious the experience was on a Gulfstream.
Yeah, we definitely try and pack as much science as we can into all of our aircraft. So the G550 is going to be one of the most advanced high altitude research jets in the world, unparalleled. So we're very excited to get it instrumented and in our hands here in the next couple of years.
Can you tell me quickly about some of the Azores research that was planned? There's talk of maybe flying into some of the tropical waves as they emerge from Africa instead of waiting for them to be born into tropical cyclones.
Yeah, so we support the Hurricane Research Division that's based in NOAA's Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Lab, based in Miami. So we work a lot with research with them on, tropical cyclone development, tropical waves, looking at the Saharan air layer. So sometimes we've used our G4 all the way out to Barbados and even the P3 all the way out into Barbados to try and fly some of these storms or developments before they even arrive. And we're also looking at, eventually future research, maybe to go to the Azores or other locations so that we can get even further into that into that stage to try and help understand the developments of these storms and what makes them form.
And a final question, NOAA works with the U.S. Air Force to fly into hurricanes and launch the dropsondes and all the research devices to gather data for the National Hurricane Center to go into the computer models. NOAA is also doing research outside of hurricanes, but the bottom line is that NOAA is more research-based. The Air Force is mission-based as far as launching the dropsondes. But you guys work hand in hand. You're both integral into flying these storms and gathering the data. Now, some folks have asked me, just from the TV weather point of view, why do we have to fly into these things? In other words, if you take away the airplanes and you take away all the risk and all the money and all the stuff that goes into it, how badly would that impact hurricane forecasting today?
Well, when you have hurricane forecasting, a lot of your viewers or you yourself are familiar with what we call the spaghetti models, right? So you have the lines that go forward to try and show where the storm might end up. Well, those lines and those models all need to have initial conditions. And the reason we fly both the WP-3D Orion here and the Air Force WC-130Js is to drop these dropsondes in order to gather those initial conditions at the time when the models start. So when we're doing operational missions to what we call reconnaissance or fixed missions for the National Hurricane Center, both the Air Force and the NOAA planes are trying to get to the center by a certain time, dropping the dropsonde at that time to give that data to start the model. If that model data isn't there, then you can't really be confident in the quality of the model that goes, right? If you have old data that you put into a new model run, then it may not be as successful because there's a lot of stuff going on in the atmosphere thermodynamically. So we help make sure that those models always start from what is happening on the ground. The initial conditions are based on as close to real time as possible through our flights.
So the cone of uncertainty that everybody knows, the cone that tells you where the future tropical system may go, stays a little bit narrower, it sounds like, with all of the research and all of the data being gathered from the center of these hurricanes.
Yes, that's right. And then our high altitude jet, Gonzo, the one you flew, is the one sort of ring fencing or going around the storm to gather all of the information from 45,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean with these dropsondes in order to understand, how is the outside affecting where this hurricane may go. So if you consider the hurricane like an angry blob of fire ants or a cork, floating in a creek, the G4 is going out there to figure out, okay, where are the rocks, where are the deeper eddies, where are those things that might affect where that cork will eventually go ashore, and you don't really want to deal with those fire ants. So that's sort of the value the G4 has, in that it's narrowing that cone of uncertainty, and it's also extending out how accurate they feel that will be. So we've narrowed that cone of uncertainty by about 25% over the years, and increased the lead time from 3 days to about 5 days now with the data the G4 has been able to gather.
And naturally, that saves billions of dollars over the season in preparations, because it stops people who don't need to prepare from having to prepare, and vice versa. Life and property all saved, so that's very good stuff. Well, I'm here today with Jonathan Shannon from the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, operating currently out of Lakeland Linder Airport, where the NOAA hurricane hunters are based. Appreciate your time today, and good luck during the 2022 hurricane season.
Thanks for having us aboard, Bruce.
All right, appreciate it.